What's up, everyone? Thanks for tuning in today. I'm T. Today's a very, very special podcast. It's our 20th episode. And this one marks a turning point for me in this development. We went from in the car recordings to audio only, and now we have video, I think about 3 episodes in, which is pretty cool. Our last few recordings, we were in the basement, and we still are. But we have this pretty ping pong room divider behind, cover up a little bit of the bare walls. It was just leaning around here. Figured I got to make use of it. So, it'd be great if I get this place into a nice studio. That would be awesome. I would love to make this podcast a very long-term development. And for now, we'll just continue as we do, get the word out and open the floodgates of real-world cultivation. It's gonna be really fun. So today's topic is pretty heavy. It's a big one. It's the idea of walking in two worlds, and this kind of feel touches many who somewhat tasted the fruits of momentary awakening and sometimes feel like they don't belong, or feel like they're walking with one foot in this world and one foot in the spirit world, so to say. So sit back, relax, and we'll go for a ride on this one. This is deep. So, as a cultivator, once you see clearly, even for a little moment, you feel like you're walking or living in two worlds. And one world of how you were before and how everyone has always been, where they're going. And the other one is like you see the stream of all things playing out, even a little bit, and kind of almost realize or feel like you're realizing the causes and conditions of things, the reasoning behind why things are happening. The truth is, you're not seeing, or there's not that there, it's not that there are two worlds, but we could call it that for convenience purposes. It is and has always been one world with the frameworks of how that one is perceived, which is what makes the discernment of this and that world being different. It appears as two happenings occurring at the same time, but actually, where they're happening, where they arise, where they arose and manifested, where they end and change, it's the same place. And it has nothing to do with the concepts of the here and now. So let's deep dive into this illusory difference. See the overall clarity of the world as it truly is when a cultivator awakens. However, we have to be clear that awakening or enlightenment, once revealed, it doesn't mean the cultivator's finished and that they truly know everything. We need to break that down a little bit so we can clearly understand awakening and revealing the true nature. This is just the beginning. So today we are going deep. We're going in to find out if this is in your league. So if you feel like this is a little bit out of your league, just stay for the ride. See what makes sense and let that settle in. And if you're those who are already soaked in this, you're already in the world of cultivation, you're in for a treat. So let's start from what happens when awakening, the first revelation of enlightenment becomes a thing for you. All I'm about to say is just for the sake of saying so. So by no means are these states or experiences a one-size-fits-all thing. States differ ultimately, but generally, there can be small markers of similarity. Overall, the so-called experience of awakening is individualistic. It's based on the person's mind. So think of it this way. When one awakens, it isn't that they were asleep, truly, and now they spring up from a dreamlike existence. That's not the thing. It's that in that moment there was stillness. There was no movement of the senses, the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind. Yes, we consider the mind a sense. The senses didn't fluctuate. They didn't grasp for stimulation externally or internally. So remember, the mind is also a sense, right? Just repeat that. It's the thinking, the perceiving, the cognition. So not even a thought arose. And for that moment, there was nothingness, so to say. You can't claim it's nothingness while in the state. So if we want to call it a state, because, well, we could call it a state, but if you thought about it, while in that practice, it wasn't the non-dual state of clarity. It would be just your thinking sense doing its thing. So let's call this an extreme point while applying single-minded focus. Your senses got absorbed inwards. No energy was leaking out, grasping, naming, basically discriminating on this and that. They reach a point where there's no happenings registering, nothing observed. The notions of self disappear, and that's that. Gone. Now, it may last for a moment. It could last for longer. Who knows? There's no time registration happening in the senses, in consciousness during that state, so you don't know. Your consciousness isn't dependent on the senses, and it isn't separate from all these things either. That's the thing. Excuse me. We'll call this happening an instance. So for that instance, such clarity was unobstructed. You won't know it. And the energy that was once used for experiencing the self and the world around you was reserved, saved, and turned back into itself, so to say. When that instance passes and the senses begin their activity again, the you starts to reform. However, because of the instance of non-duality having been for as long as it was, that much of non-interference of the external and internal world, so to say, was not happening. And that amount of time that the non-discrimination was occurring, so to say, there was clarity. So, that influences the senses neurologically and intangibly by the mind and energy. So, what remains, so to say, remains, is a presence of clarity. Slowly nourishes the body and mind, and its nourishment is like food for the seeds of enlightenment. Complete clarity, the means without dual thinking. That's what it means. No dual thinking. You'll know what dual thinking is after having cultivated it. And when you know, uh, even describing it feels weird. And I took my time with that because it's really important. You don't cultivate non-duality. You cultivate single-minded focus in time through consistency and effort. Your senses pull inward. Your energy is not going out and grasping for things. Your senses aren't engaged in the grasping and the, paying attention to a whole bunch of stimulation. So what happens? Things are brought into a single point. Over time, that distinction of that single point disappears, dissolves. The you dissolves, the self dissolves. You're not kicking anything out. You're just taking energy, focus, mind away from things and putting it into one thing. In time, that one thing dissolves, it disappears. Non-discrimination, right? You're not thinking this or that. Non-duality. You're not making this or that. It falls in the same category. That's what happens. So the longer you're in that state, or the longer there is time within that practice, and you're not moved in your senses, that bit of clarity stays and starts influencing the body and the senses and the neurological system and your cognition and all these things. And it starts to show out in time. Very important that we understand it that way. So you can't really have an intellectual understanding of these things. It has to be experienced. Okay. So in your daily doings, that little bit of instance of clarity that you got during practice, it does shine out, shows through. Because there was time spent, not on entertaining through the senses, more on non-dual, non-discrimination, your senses engage the world that way, little by little. This doesn't mean you'll not be able to discern things, okay? It means you will know, or you're starting to see the influence of things and how they pull your senses in all mannerisms. You're starting to recognize your cyclic habits. And you now have the mannerisms. You'll develop the mannerisms of stillness in your interactions throughout the day, which allows for your responses to be a little bit more in line with the realization of causes and conditions of the happenings and perspectives you experience and hold. It's a mouthful there. So, how is this like walking in two worlds? Well, before such an instance of clarity, you walked in the world as you did. After that instance of clarity, You still walk in the same world, but the framework in which your senses perceive such a world has slightly changed. And the more you cultivate single-minded focus, the more such clarity will influence the senses till they're running in the stream of non-dual perception, so to say. Yep, yep, yep. You will be aware of all that during your usual doings of life and stuff, and you'll be able to touch on, a little bit of clarity in what you do, which is the point. You want to act in that clarity, and eventually, as often as possible, till that's all you do all the time. Both acting on it and cultivating it must be hand in hand. You'll begin to experience the world through a new lens. And the reason it's a lens is because there is no doubt you will begin to create new notions, ideas about how you see the world. And this is why cultivation is so important. And self introspection is king. Usually, when one begins to see the world with a faint sense of clarity, a little bit, they begin to assume many things. It's a usual cycle, especially with the notion that they see the world how it truly is. With that, more thinking happens, and reasoning in that thinking further nourishes the seeds of confusion. It just keeps building a head on top of a head. That's the insight needed. And here is the insight needed: the clarity of non duality, non discrimination, realized during cultivation practice is always that. It isn't the intellectualized notions that we make up based on how different we feel. And the fact that we can still discriminate on how we feel in comparison to what we're experiencing tells us that we need more practice. When notions of the world you think you knew and now experience are put to an end, it would have be it would have been because of consistent practice and investigation of the mind, which is self-introspection, basically. That happens gradually and with sudden realizations. And this is why, just after awakening or realizing, revealing that true nature, original wisdom, unbiased thusness, even for a moment, needs refinement. One instance of, I got it. It's not enough. It's not enough at all. It barely touches the tip of the iceberg, and the iceberg is simply the mind. And you see how this is a big perspectives check. All cultivation of realizing your true nature, whatever you wish to call it, is always inner work. It's a perspectives check. And then you repeat it. You repeat the process. So I'll repeat this. You aren't walking in two worlds. That phrase is only a way of pointing to the recognition of the stream of momentum behind the causes and conditions as they unfold. And that recognition feels lighter simply because less attention is being fed into the endless stimulation pulling at the senses. Ooh, that's another mouthful. And this is a conundrum most cultivators face. So here's your perspectives check again. As cultivation deepens, the cultivator may begin to recognize a stream and how events are likely to unfold. This doesn't mean total clarity or control. It's only a recognition of momentum and conditions. The moment the thought arises, this thought, oh, that's how this will go, the danger begins. If the cultivator adds notions to that clarity, the state becomes filtered through the senses again and turns illusory. It's make believe. A framework forms, shaped by preference, emotion, and personal history, and that framework begins influencing the experience itself. If the cultivator recognizes this clarity as arising from non discrimination and does not add to it, doesn't act from it prematurely, then it remains clean. The conflict is real. A cultivator may see conditions clearly and feel compelled to intervene for whatever or for what appears to be for a greater good. But no matter how clear the seeing, no matter what you see, it's ultimately the people involved who have to do something. They have to act on it. If they don't recognize their own conditions, the cultivator's effort changes very little. And in relationships, this becomes even more delicate. Acting on insight before the other person has reached their own understanding often creates confusion and resistance. And this is why when you know, you don't know. The knowing is for you, not for showing off. Others got to realize things on their own time. And when realization is forced and pushed on others, confusion and loss of integrity follow. So cultivators say little, don't say so much, and you act quietly, adjust your own conditions, move where movement is appropriate, but don't reveal what others have not yet seen for themselves, because that only creates disturbances. Whew, this is a heavy talk, but it's a necessary. It's a very necessary. It's cold in here, so it's cold in the basement, even with the heat on. Um, Basically, to sum that aspect up, you don't say what you see without the conditions around you, without the situations calling for you to act on the conditions you see or the influences you see. It's like seeing the future a few moments ahead. You only see a few moments ahead and you go, oh, I'm going to react to how that's going to turn out. You can't do that because there's missing pieces in between. So you don't have to show off and be like, hey, this is going to happen because this is the influence. You're going to cause more confusion for yourself and other people. That's why we don't say. That's why we know that we don't know. So don't speak prematurely. Don't act prematurely. Wait. Observe. The time will come for you to act appropriately on the things that you are seeing. Okay. Again, it is a heavy talk and it is very necessary. And for me, this was one of the hardest lessons to learn. I cultivated on my own without guides. I used to run headfirst into walls trying to understand why people didn't change when I could clearly see the causes behind their actions. It was a tough time for many years. I would reveal things to them and act towards them based on what I saw unfolding. But nothing changed anyway. It just made things worse, really. Um, there's a cost to trying to alter outcomes before others are ready to see their own causes. And when I used to do this, most people had no awareness of what was automatically running in the background. Their background programs in their mind. Um, they lived entirely from habit, as we all do. They would act, suffer the results, and wonder why things kept happening, and ask for advice, and then be unable to hear it when I gave it. And then I noticed this clearly during conflict. When I argued with someone, I would address the issue at the level of the mind ground, at the causes. They were arguing entirely at the level of the senses, basically the outcomes. We weren't even speaking the same language, basically. And so the mind ground is where, we say it's where the causes are planted. You can call it the subconscious if you like, just to give it a framework. It's okay. We call it the ground of influence, right? So from there, actions arise and outcomes blow through life like the wind. But most people only focus on the outcomes. Cultivator, the cultivator is concerned with causes. And this is the hard truth. Realization can't be given. Whether it's insight into behavior, realization of true nature, it only happens when a person's ready. So when they're not, no amount of explanation will make it land. Hmm. And this is why even the Buddha cannot simply enlighten everyone. Everyone must arrive on their own. They have to come to this space through their own causes and conditions. Yeah, I know this one, it's a pretty heavy realization to take that you can see something happening in a person's life. You can see the pattern of their behavior, their causes and conditions. You can maybe a little bit of the causes and conditions, but you can see patterns through their senses. You can see patterns through their speech and the things that they experience. And you can really see that stream of, oh my God, this is most likely going to happen. Let me stop that, or let me influence it, or let me tell them. And they don't because they're not ready. They can't see it. So the more we push them, the more problem we can cause. Unless it's like a life and death situation, you really got to tell them to stop something or don't do something. By all means, make something up. There was a story. I'm going to go off my little script here because I write everything down and then I run through it for hours, making sure my point is very clear or as clear as possible. And then I just make sure it's ready because I don't like to run off on tangents like I'm doing now in the middle of the point. But I'll get to a story. Paraphrasing the story, it's been a long time since I told this story, so bear with me. A story about the Buddha seeing a kid playing at a well. I'm pretty sure it's a very famous story. And the kid's playing at the well, and he sees that the kid could fall in. Um, how deep he saw that possibility, beyond me, beyond us. However, he sees his kid playing at the well, and he tells the kid he has candy in his hand, basically offering the kid candy. And of course, the kid got up and he went to grab the candy. But he didn't have candy. He lied. He lied conditionally to save the kid. So he saw the strong probability of the kid falling into the well and getting hurt. But if he told the kid, stop, you're going to hurt yourself, get away from there, it could either startle the kid or the kid could push a sense of authority. Like, no, it's okay. I understand. I know what I'm doing. I'm safe. I do this all the time. So instead of that, and in the possibility or in the situation where the kid is explaining to the Buddha the possibility of him falling in during that time, so the Buddha's like, hey, I have some candy because I know kids like candy. Let me tell him. Kid comes over. Where's the candy? I lied. Ha ha ha. Oops. The kid didn't fall in the well. But so if you see happenings and you want to call it out, there's going to be resistance from the other person. So life or death situations where it's just situations that are really harmful to the person, and you really strongly feel and you see and you're honest about that in yourself, like in your heart of heart, you can see, you can know. Make something up to stop them from doing. It's okay afterwards. Just they didn't do the thing. Perhaps the inevitability of what they were doing would have caused them harm, but you jumped in without telling them these are the things that are happening and you are not going to, make it through this. Instead of saying that, you can give them some other thing that takes their attention, pulls them away from the probabilities, lessens the probability of them hurting themselves. When it comes to general things like misunderstandings of this and that and arguments, and you're seeing things rise and you're seeing, conditions play out, you're like, oh my God, I know this is going to happen, but I want to stop it. How come I couldn't stop it? Because the other person doesn't know those things. So you have to make proper your interplay with the other person, so there isn't much resistance. Sometimes when you know, just don't know. Uh, but it's done purposefully. Anyway, that is it for episode 20. This is pretty deep. I kind of like to break down a lot of these small states that we experience in cultivation, because sometimes we get a little taste and we run with it and start making up a whole bunch of different things and notions and build up personas. The whole point is to dissolve things so we can see clearly and then use them as tools so you don't get taken by them. Anyway, if you have any questions, topic ideas, comments, feel free to reach out at Eric at awaken24.com. And you can get the show notes at awaken24.com/podcast. So enjoy, have a wonderful day. Peace.